analyze our industry at the moment, what would you say are the biggest challenges we have to face at the moment? And what do you think, or how do you think, do we handle those challenges? Yeah, it's a very complex question because you, of course, cannot answer it for the whole games industry in Asia and South America and whatsoever. But in the industry, you know very well. So let's say in the Western world, or yeah.
Well, I think that it's kind of like being in a room that has a number of very bright lights.
Mm-hmm.
When you look in any one direction, that topic, that light floods your vision and you can't see anything else. And actually, I think there's a variety of things. So one of the topics that I think is critical right now is actually the subject of my talk at DevCom,
Mm-hmm.
which is we've got another hardware transition, another next gen coming. And what does that mean for game developers?
Mm-hmm.
We now are at a point, since I've had the chance to work in the industry because of being old, for every hardware transition going back to the original war between Atari and Intellivision.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a few of these, and I've
Mm-hmm.
seen the mistakes that people have made over and over and over again. Some of these, I think the industry is learning from. Pricing, for example, the hardware makers, repeatedly, different companies would price their initial consoles too high,
Mm-hmm.
would have established brands following fans, gamers, and then they would use pricing to chase people off of their new systems,
Mm-hmm.
which allowed other companies and other consoles to challenge them. That
Mm-hmm.
happened over and over again. Companies would get overconfident. We're the big hot console now. We'll bring in our new version. We'll go next gen. We'll crush the competition. Nobody will care about anything else.
Mm.
A year and a half later, they're doing layoffs because everybody didn't cooperate with their plan because they weren't as good as they thought they were. Humility is a very good thing in this industry because the minute you think you know everything about games,
Mm-hmm.
the games industry, the games audience, the hardware, something will hand you a big surprise and teach you to be humble and to be a learning machine, not a supposed expert. So I
Yeah.
think to finish answering the question you were asking me about big issues facing games as we look forward right now, I think the final issue is one that we've seen go through much of game history.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, we have, in the last 20 years, we've built an international game audience
Mm-hmm.
that's incredibly diverse, where we reach pretty much almost every corner of the globe, and we reach players.
Mm-hmm.
But the game community that makes games still is very restricted in many ways. And in different parts of the world, different elites have much greater access to making games rather than anyone who loves games and has the natural talent.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a challenge long term for the next 20 years is how do we make the community of game makers look as diverse and as international as the community of game players? And this is important, I think, for two reasons. One is principle. We want to have respect for all human beings. And if we have an art form here, as I believe, as well as an industry, we want to welcome everyone into it. The argument I make when I'm talking to large companies about this is that if you want to sell the most copies of anything, the team that creates it should be like the group of people who are going to experience it. And so one of the things I share with companies I advise is I say, do you have a picture you took at a company picnic or a party or something like this?
Mm-hmm.
And a picture of the team, and sometimes you'll have team photos. And I'll say, now, tell me about where your players are, what your audience looks like. And I'll find a photo online, or I'll kind of make up a mix of things that shows what the audience looks like. If the team photo and the audience photo at first glance look like they could, oh, are those the same people? Oh, no, those are different faces. But the people fit with each other. That's great. If the team all looks has one look, whatever that look is, and the audience look is diverse and different, that means you as a business are not taking advantage of connecting with your audience thoroughly because you're not starting from a place where you're like your audience. So being like your audience is a business reason to do it, apart from the principle of inclusion and openness and equality.
Yeah.
So I think that both noble ideals and very real practical business reasons say that we as an industry have to do a better job of making ourselves look like our audience.
I'm really interested to get your opinion on how the market is going to develop. What do you think about the new brands? Will we see a lot of new brands coming up, or is it more just like the fifth part of the same brand?
Mm-hmm. I think that this is a problem that began for the industry really in the 1990s. Because in the 1990s, some people say, well, just the consoles getting big. What really started it was that in the 1990s, the video game publishers started to go public and to be listed on the public markets in the United States, in the UK, in Europe, and in Japan, and later in China. When companies are publicly traded and their stock value goes up and down each day, that's a game, but it's a game with real money and real stakes. And part of what they have to do is those companies need to keep growing. And every 3 months, they have to show they did better than either the prior 3 months or the same 3 months last year. So it creates this insane, imbalanced emphasis on growth. And so when that happens, these companies also recognize, hey, we're big companies, we have a lot of money. We can now discourage competition by building big games so only a few competitors can come with us. This all started in the 1990s. And of course, the size of the budgets keeps growing. But the issue relative to the industry overall began then. So I think, so first thing is to understand is big console games are built by big companies. And they may hire great talent. If you look at the teams who are building these great story-based games inside Microsoft, inside Sony, or in their key partnerships, where very often they own the studios that are involved. That is a big company process. And having done a lot of AAA games, there are a bunch of requirements that come with it. You must think about scale. Very often you have to show off the hardware. And you can't necessarily always think about gameplay. One of the problems that sports games, for example, have had is that in sports games, at one time we were really trying to simulate the experience for people. But then when graphics got so good and became so strong on consoles, the emphasis actually shifted away from building the best possible game to having the perfect recreations of each player's face. And more of the budget went away from testing gameplay in many, not all titles. Instead of testing gameplay, it went into this, oh, look, there's a blemish on this player's face. Can we get it into the game? Just everything so you can just look at the face. And for some games, that photo recreation has come to dominate designs. So that's an example of the power of the machines working against us. On the other hand, if you look at some of the best storytelling games from any of the platforms, they're really making interactive movies where we're playing with them. The decision is how interactive do we make it? How good does a player have to be to play along at the easiest level? But if you look at the best games they're competing with movies as an interactive experience. And yes, they're gigantic and of huge scale, and that's part of the experience because they're not competing with other games, they're competing with films. So I think it's a complicating factor. We just have to understand the realities of the industry and really what it's been like for the last 20 or 25 years. It becomes more glaring as the budgets get bigger and bigger. But that's why the indie scene even though it is not what it was 10 years ago. And it's become so crowded that the crowding is the issue rather than big budget being the issue. But that's where a lot of new ideas will have to start. Because if I have to pitch a 30, 50, $75 million game, what is the big thing that my audience of executives I'm pitching to is thinking about? A, they have to make the stock price go up, which means they need to make revenue go up. And they have to avoid risk. You have to have predictable revenue. That's what the stock market wants. You're rewarded in your stock price for predictable revenue. So if I'm saying, here's a $70 million game, and it's tied to the Harry Potter franchise, back when the films were coming out. But wait, Harry Potter's a big deal. Boy, that you get a lot. I couldn't look like a failure. I couldn't make the stock price go down. If we build a reasonably good game, a Harry Potter game, yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, that'll be good. I like that idea because it's predictable. That's why licenses become such a big deal when we're deep in console cycles. When consoles been out for a few years, you'll notice that's when we get a lot of these big licenses. There's lots of machines in the install base, and we'll get lots of licensed games. The real risk-taking originals we get on console are frequently at the start of a cycle because it's a smaller audience. It's a game lovers audience. It's a game experts audience. The early adopters of consoles. No games, no gaming, no consoles. Very often for them, controllers feel like an extension of their body to them. They have a spiritual link to their controller, not just a digital link with their hands. And for that audience, you build something different than if you're trying to please 100 million people. So these are all factors that come in when we think about AAA and console. And this is part of what I talk about I will be talking about at DevCom, are all these different factors that AAA teams that we need to think about when we're doing it. It's great that support gives you a great head start on selling lots of games. I'm very grateful for the chance to have had AAA hits. But there are also pressures and restrictions. Everything in life is a give and a take, a yin and a yang, a balance. And those are both the plus sides and the downsides of AAA console.